The board approved two funding plans, the bond expenditure plans, one for the Central Valley to provide the $2.6 million match for the federal funds and continue advancing that project, and then the other to approve the $600 million that has been appropriated for the peninsula for that project. That then began under Prop 1A the 60-day review period that's called for the Director of Finance to review the plans and determine, as it's phrased in the statute, whether those plans are likely to succeed, and with input from the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. That input came into the Director of Finance, and on March 3rd, the Director of Finance provided two letters, which you have in your packets, one on each of the plans. For the Central Valley plan, I'm pleased to say the Department of Finance was able to approve the plan, which means after a long wait, a lot of years, a lot of challenges, we are actually going to be out, the Treasurer will be selling bonds and we'll be spending bond funds on the program as intended. And so that is moving forward. We're very pleased with that, and it's an important, very important milestone for us in the program. The Peninsula situation is different. As I'm sure everyone knows, the full funding grant agreement, which was part of the funding plan and assumed in this board's approval of the $600 million. That went through all of the departmental reviews at the United States Department of Transportation, went through a 30-day waiting period, basically, for Congress to be advised of it. At the conclusion of that 30 days, the Federal Transit Administration advised Caltrain that it was deferring a decision on the full funding grant agreement. Because of that deferral, the Department of Finance then was not able to give its final sign-off on this funding plan to spend the bond funds, because the bond funds assumed the availability of the federal funds. And so in the letter, you'll see that Director Cohen made it very clear that if the full funding grant agreement had been executed, he would have approved the expenditure of the bond funds. He was ready to do so. It met all the other requirements. But the failure to execute the full funding grant agreement made it impossible for him to be able to sign off and say that the plan can proceed. So right now he also said the second that gets resolved, let me know and I'll get back to you and approve. An important element there. But so what that means right now is the Central Valley moves forward. We'll be, as I said, the Treasurer will be selling bonds this spring, and we'll be spending them and over the course of the coming year. The Peninsula project, we're waiting to see what happens in Washington, basically, and see how that situation gets resolved. So don't have anything more specific to report at this point, but did want to make sure the board was aware of where we were on those two pieces and answer any questions you may have.
Yeah. Let's see if people have questions. Ms. Pascat.
Jeff, thank you for the report. I have questions and then maybe comments that may or may not be helpful. So my first question is, why the delay?
So the letter, the Federal Transit Administration, the acting administrator, there's not a new appointee in place, indicated that it was to allow for the new president's budget to be to determine where transit funding and that grant therefore fit within the new president's budget and whether they could enter into that commitment. Not exactly clear when that will be known. There is what's called the skinny budget is supposed to be released tomorrow. It's not expected that that will give any level of detail which would allow the FTA to move ahead and execute the grant. It'll probably be May before that happens. As you know, though, there was also, in addition to that FTA letter, just before it, there was a letter from 14 members of the congressional delegation, California congressional delegation, which urged Secretary Chow not to sign off on the grant until some additional reviews could be done of the high-speed rail program, even though high-speed rail was not applying for this grant. And so we've got a combination of procedural issues and then other issues in Washington now, which will have made it less and less clear about what the timing for resolution of this is.
So, thank you for that. Is it your opinion that the delay and uncertainties is a reaction to the letter sent by this congressional members?
There's no question that it's played a role, and it certainly complicates things going forward.
And unfortunately, I've seen the letter from the 14 congressional members. I think that was organized and led by the House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy. It's disappointing to see that there's a lot of rhetoric coming out of D.C. regarding infrastructure and jobs, and the actions are the opposite with respect to this project. Just with the letter and the resulting reaction by the new administration and the resulting delay, do you know how much that's going to cost this project?
The ultimate cost, of course, will depend on how long the delay is, and if it's just a delay, or if it's so. Caltrain, after receiving this, negotiated with its contractors, because you'll remember, important to again remember, this is Caltrain's project. We are funding a piece of it, but Caltrain administers the contract. They've entered.
The letter that was signed by the 14 congressional members was focused on those people.
There was, and there was a subsequent letter sent by, I believe it was 26 members of the delegation, responding to that letter and clarifying a lot of the things that were in that letter. There were a lot of errors and misimpressions, if you will, about that.
Can we just call them misrepresentations?
Misrepresentations.
You're being so polite.
I'm trying to. They were alternative facts, I guess.
Lies,
we can call them.
alternative facts, right.
And a key premise of the original letter was it certainly suggested that this grant was an 11th hour decision made by the Obama administration, and that we were the applicant, which of course neither of those was the case. This process has been underway for years, and Caltrain is the applicant. After receiving that notice, Caltrain worked with the two contractors it has on board, Balfour, which is doing the electrification piece, and Stadler, which is the railcar manufacturer. Those are the two elements of the project. They were able to negotiate an extension of the contracts. That doesn't come without a price, though, and so they've extended the contracts through the end of June. That is going to cost about $20 million. That's just a delay cost due to the lack of action there. So it's at least $20 million.
Right. We're rightfully concerned, Mr. Ross has pointed out, with $3 million.
Right.
We have our own California congressional delegation, led by Mr. McCarthy, who's caused us $20 million delay. So I'm hopeful that the staff,
Mike,
with
give
your
her her
leadership,
microphone.
I'm hopeful that the staff, with your leadership, can come up with an approach that prevents further expenditures and gets us away from this, seems to me, pure politics for an important part of this. And I'm disappointed that this is happening.
I will also tell you, Chairman Richard and I were in Washington last week and met with a number of members about this and other issues. I was also at the American Public Transportation Association meeting, and this has sent shockwaves throughout communities around the country, because transit agencies that have been in the pipeline for grants for years now have to wonder, could something like this happen to them? And in a case like this, you're talking multiple sources of funds, significant local funds that have been committed on the premise of federal matching funds being there. So it's an issue of real concern, I think, for everything. We are working very closely with Caltrain and with the other funding partners to try to minimize any impact, but obviously we can't control what the outcome is here. And the real question is,
Jeff,
will there be an answer?
To the extent that there is an impact caused by the actions of some of our congressional members, that should be communicated. We have a $20 million delay. I think over 90% of the jobs on this, whether it's utility relocation or other jobs, are from California. And they're from the communities in which we're doing these projects. And so they're hurting their own communities from a jobs perspective, and they're hurting us financially because of the politics that are being pursued. And so while I know you're being diplomatic, and I know that I'm not, my hope is that, and that's why I'm saying it today in our hearing, my hope is that that the public understands that the posturing is causing real money and has impacted jobs in our state, and that this agency through the staff not only tries to resolve a bad situation, but accurately communicates the impact.
And I just, if I might, I'd like to do two things. First, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of my colleague, Ms. Pasquette, who I think has laid this out very well. And let me just also say, I don't think we should sugarcoat any of this, and as she didn't sugarcoat any of this. This was an unbelievably irresponsible act on the part of these members of Congress. First of all, to send a letter that was based on matters that were demonstrably untrue and urge the administration to act on something that's predicated on things that are on their face false was just shocking. They may have their issues with high-speed rail. I think they're wrong about that. I think they're on the wrong side of history. I think, as Ms. Pasquette pointed out, they're acting against the interest of their own constituents, as she said. But, you know, beyond that, that had nothing to do with Caltrain. I mean, in fact, it's shocking to me that members of Congress, with all the resources of their staff, the Congressional Research Service and so forth, wouldn't understand that this grant was not made by the High-Speed Rail Authority, and in fact was dealt with an entirely different part of the Department of Transportation, an entirely different program. Our funding partner is the Federal Railroad Administration. This grant was coming through the Federal Transit Administration. It had nothing to do with high-speed rail. It was a grant to increase capacity on a rail line that's at full capacity. That was the purpose of it. So, and I want to be very careful about one thing, though. The Trump administration has not acted on this yet, other than to defer this. We haven't seen a policy expression from the administration. So I think that the blame here needs to be firmly lodged with the Republican congressional members who asked the administration to hold this off. And my hope is that because the President is talking about infrastructure investment and killing or deferring the Caltrain electrification is totally inimical to that, that the administration will basically recognize the request for what it was and ignore it. So I just want to make sure we don't shoot at the wrong target at this point. And I think Ms. Pasquette was very precise in assigning the blame where I think it belongs. And I support her in that. And I had the opportunity, as did Mr. Morales, to testify yesterday before a committee of our state Senate. And Chairman James Bell, who was one of the founding members of the Peninsula Caltrain Joint Powers Authority, was outraged by this because he knows the amount of work that was done. He also knows the burden that the people in that region have taken on themselves to fund Caltrain electrification, and all the work that's been done over 20 years to make this happen, to be undone at the last minute by an errant, uninformed, factually incorrect assertion on the part of people for what can only be described as a political motivation. So, Lorraine, I apologize if I was less passionate about it than you are.
That's a first.
Yeah, we go way back, Ms. Pasquette and I. Anyway, so with her, I share the hope that I know Jeff and I were in conversations yesterday. Transportation Secretary Kelly is very involved in this, the governor's office. The governor himself has written to Secretary Chow asking to discuss this matter with her. And you know, this is something that the people of Silicon Valley are extremely concerned about. The businesses in Silicon Valley have been banging away for Caltrain electrification and other transportation improvements to deal with real impediments to their business operations. So I don't see how anybody who purports to care about Silicon Valley can take this action. Anyway.
Oh. I'll just say I couldn't express it any better than you and Lorraine have. This is quite simply, and I'm not known for being diplomatic either, a despicable act of Republican congressional politics at its worst. I didn't think they could sink any lower, but they have, and you were quite right in pointing out that where the blame lies here, and it's not with the administration yet. And I hope that we are working closely, that is, our staff, with the stakeholders along the corridor, with Silicon Valley, with McCarthy's district business leaders, as well as the people who are who would stand to benefit economically, jobs, etc., to let them know what the truth is, because this is, you know, I've seen some low things in my lifetime, but boy, this is a new low.
You know what the irony is on this? The stated purpose of the letter was to try to impede the high-speed rail program. If any of them had bothered to read our business plan, they would know that we can open an operating, self-sustaining segment just to San Jose. So if they delayed the Caltrain electrification, they don't impede the opening of an initial operating segment of high-speed rail, they only impede Caltrain. Now, ultimately, we need that corridor electrified. There's no question about it. But in the short term, it doesn't accomplish what they wanted it to accomplish. So, classic case of shooting at somebody and hitting the hostage.
Well, and not only that, but should the federal money not ultimately appear, and the state and the region are forced to come up with alternative sources, that means $647 million of other projects in the state don't happen in order to fund this, because the federal money will have been yanked. So it has ripple effects in multiple ways.
And I would only hope that those offsetting project impacts are not peanut buttered across all transportation projects, but are selectively applied in certain regions of the state.
Mr. Chair.
Madam former Chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, yes?
Thank you. Just a comment. I think we're all aware that this is a project of national significance, and that all of the equipment used in construction comes from just about every congressional district in the country. So my hope is that in a short amount of time, other congressional representatives around the country perhaps will lean on those who delayed this project, the electrification, to say, you know, we all need this. We need this for our districts, for the businesses in our districts that are making parts for construction equipment, ultimately for rail equipment. It is a project of national significance. And I think the other element to be aware of is how much we're improving freight movement in California, and of course that too is a national issue.
Well, the bottom line on this is that they wrote a letter trying to impede the high-speed rail project. As a consequence, the Caltrain project is delayed. The high-speed rail project got its approval of its subsection D funding plan, and we are continuing to build. So that's where things are. Okay, anything else, Mr. Morales?
That's it for the good news.
Okay, and that appears to complete our agenda today. I think that the closed session memo